Manipulation only works where there is uncertainty, hesitation, and emotional dependence. The moment a man steps into true masculine leadership, that entire structure collapses. This is why manipulative women don't dislike leadership on a surface level. They despise what it takes away from them: leverage. Masculine leadership means the man sets direction internally first. He knows what he wants, he knows where he's going, and he's not outsourcing decisions to emotional pressure or approval seeking. When this happens, the relationship no longer revolves around managing his reactions, and manipulation requires reaction to survive. A manipulative dynamic depends on a man needing something: attention, reassurance, validation, certainty, or emotional safety from the woman. Once a man no longer needs those things to feel grounded, control evaporates. Leadership removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is the playground of manipulation. When a man leads, he makes decisions calmly and moves forward without emotional bargaining. He doesn't ask permission to be himself. He doesn't negotiate his boundaries through guilt. He doesn't delay action because of potential disapproval. That alone neutralizes manipulation because there's no emotional opening to exploit. Manipulative behavior feeds on indecision. Should I say this? What if she pulls away? Maybe I should explain more. Masculine leadership replaces that internal dialogue with clarity. This is what I'm doing. This is what I tolerate. This is where I'm going. Clarity is threatening to manipulation because it exposes intent. Games only work when the direction is unclear. When a man's direction is obvious, manipulation becomes visible, and once it's visible, it loses effectiveness. Another critical piece is that leadership shifts the emotional frame. Instead of asking, "How do I keep her happy?" the masculine question becomes, "Does this align with my standards?" That single shift moves power back to the man without force, aggression, or control. Manipulative women often rely on emotional fog, mixed signals, fluctuating availability, reward-withdrawal cycles. These tactics only work when the man is trying to decode her emotions instead of staying anchored to his own direction. A leader doesn't decode chaos, he ignores it and continues moving. That's why manipulation often escalates when leadership appears. Not because the leader is doing something wrong, but because the old strategies no longer work. Confusion doesn't move him. Guilt doesn't slow him. Emotional pressure doesn't alter his pace. Leadership also eliminates emotional bargaining. A man who leads doesn't trade his behavior for affection. He doesn't soften his standards to keep peace. He doesn't over-explain to avoid conflict. These are the exact behaviors manipulation feeds on. When those behaviors disappear, the manipulative individual feels exposed. The illusion of control fades, and resentment can appear not because the man is harsh, but because he's unreachable through emotional tactics. It's important to understand this is not about domination or superiority. Masculine leadership is self-leadership first. It's a man being loyal to his values, rhythm, and path. Anyone, man or woman, who depends on controlling others will feel threatened by that. Healthy women respond differently. They relax. They trust the direction. They feel safe in the containment of a man who knows himself. Only manipulation feels threatened by clarity. Leadership says, "I'm not lost." Manipulation requires that you are. So when a man leads, manipulation loses oxygen. There's no confusion to hide in, no emotional hunger to exploit, and no fear to weaponize. What's left is truth, and truth always dismantles games. And that's why masculine leadership removes control without ever trying to take it. Manipulation thrives on one thing above all else: emotional dependency. When a man depends on a woman's approval, reactions, or presence to feel stable, he becomes highly susceptible to guilt, fear, obligation, and emotional pressure. Masculine leadership shuts this down at the root by cultivating emotional independence. An emotionally independent man still cares, but he is not controlled by caring. Manipulative women often rely on emotional hooks: disappointment, withdrawal, silent treatment, exaggeration, or victim framing. These tactics only work when a man's emotional state is tied to her mood. If her disappointment destabilizes him, she gains influence. If her distance creates anxiety, she gains leverage. But a masculine man does not outsource his emotional regulation. He experiences emotions without being hijacked by them. He can notice sadness without fixing it. He can observe disapproval without collapsing. He can feel attraction without surrendering his frame. This neutrality is deeply frustrating to manipulation because there's nothing to grab onto. Guilt loses power when it doesn't trigger compliance. Fear loses power when it doesn't stop movement. Obligation loses power when it doesn't override standards. This doesn't mean the man is cold or unempathetic. It means empathy doesn't equal obedience. He can understand feelings without surrendering direction. That balance, presence without submission, is the essence of masculine leadership. Manipulation requires over-identification. If she feels bad, I must act. If she's upset, I must explain. If she pulls away, I must chase. Emotional independence breaks these assumptions. A grounded man recognizes that feelings are information, not commands. Someone's discomfort does not automatically require his sacrifice. Someone's reaction does not dictate his behavior. He listens, but he decides. This is where many manipulative dynamics collapse. When guilt is used, after everything I've done for you, the emotionally independent man doesn't scramble. He assesses. When fear is introduced, if you do this, I don't know what will happen. He doesn't freeze. He evaluates. When obligation is imposed, you should do this if you care. He doesn't concede. He checks alignment. And because his internal stability doesn't change, the tactic fails. Manipulative people aren't seeking resolution. They're seeking control. When control doesn't arrive, escalation often follows. But escalation without effect only exposes the tactic further. Emotional independence also eliminates the need to defend oneself endlessly. Manipulation feeds on explanations. The more a man explains, the more angles there are to attack, twist, or guilt frame. A masculine man doesn't justify his boundaries emotionally. He states them and stands by them. This creates a very uncomfortable dynamic for manipulation because emotional reactions don't produce behavioral change. There is no reward, no leverage, no payoff. So the manipulative strategy dies out or moves on. Healthy women, on the other hand, respond positively to this independence. They feel less pressure to manage him emotionally. They respect his steadiness. They feel safe knowing they don't have to tiptoe or overperform for stability. The irony is that emotional independence deepens intimacy with the right partner. Because when a man's emotional center is self-contained, connection becomes chosen, not required. Affection becomes free, flowing rather than transactional. Support becomes mutual rather than demanded. The manipulative woman despises this because she loses her influence. There is no emotional currency she can spend to alter the man's actions. He can walk away from guilt without withdrawing care. He can face fear without freezing. That kind of inner authority cannot be negotiated. And a man who governs his own emotions cannot be governed by someone else's. Manipulation only survives in the shadows. It needs gray areas, loose rules, and unspoken expectations to operate effectively. The moment a man introduces clear boundaries, the game loses its cover. And that exposure is exactly why manipulative women resist masculine leadership so strongly. A boundary is not a threat. It's not an argument. It's not a punishment. A boundary is simply a statement of reality. This is where I stop. Manipulative dynamics depend on gradual encroachment, small compromises, emotional erosion, tiny violations that feel too subtle to confront. When a man hesitates to define his limits clearly, manipulation spreads quietly. But when boundaries are clean and calmly enforced, manipulation has nowhere to hide. Masculine leadership makes boundaries visible early. Instead of negotiating standards through emotional reactions, a leader states them plainly. He doesn't need escalation. He doesn't need anger. He doesn't need repeated warnings. His boundaries are not fueled by emotion. They're anchored in self-respect. That's deeply threatening to manipulation. Manipulative women rely on plausible deniability. I didn't mean it like that. You're overreacting. I was just joking. Clear boundaries shut this down because intent becomes irrelevant. The line is visible and crossing it has a consequence, not emotional chaos, but withdrawal of access. A man with boundaries doesn't debate how he feels every time something happens. He doesn't try to convince her to agree. He simply responds in alignment with his standard. This removes the argument entirely. Boundaries also prevent emotional confusion. When a man has no clear limits, a manipulative woman can oscillate between reward and punishment. Affection one moment, withdrawal the next. This emotional whiplash keeps him off balance. Boundaries break that cycle by stabilizing the environment. Once the rules are known, manipulation loses its leverage. Another key factor, boundaries shift responsibility. Without boundaries, the man is responsible for managing her emotions, reactions, and moods. With boundaries, responsibility returns to where it belongs. She chooses how she behaves. He chooses how he responds. Manipulative personalities dislike this shift because it removes their ability to blame shift. They can no longer say, "You made me act this way." Boundaries restore accountability. Masculine boundaries are especially powerful because they are not enforced with drama. There's no begging, no ultimatums, no emotional explosion, just calm consistency. And calm consistency is devastating to manipulation. Why? Because manipulation expects reaction. It expects explaining, defending, emotional justification. When the reaction doesn't come and consequences still happen, the illusion collapses. The man is not angry. He is not pleading. He simply disengages from what doesn't align. That's when resentment often surfaces. Not because the boundary is unfair, but because the manipulative person has lost access without being able to argue their way back in. Boundaries don't debate. They stand. Healthy women respond differently. They appreciate clarity. They feel safe knowing the edges. They respect consistency. Boundaries reduce anxiety for women who aren't trying to control outcomes. But for manipulation, boundaries are exposure. They force intentions into daylight. They eliminate gray zones. They remove emotional loopholes. And once the game is visible, it's no longer fun. Masculine leadership doesn't attack manipulation. It outgrows it. And boundaries are the moment where manipulation realizes the door is closed quietly, firmly, and without apology. Manipulation enters relationships through one doorway more than any other, approval seeking. When a man needs validation to move forward, to make decisions, or to feel secure, he hands over control without realizing it. Masculine leadership closes that doorway completely because direction replaces the need for permission. A man with direction is internally referenced. A man without direction is externally controlled. Manipulative women depend on men who hesitate, men who ask, "Is this okay?" before acting, men who look for emotional green lights, men who delay decisions until they feel approved. That hesitation creates a gap, and manipulation lives in gaps. Masculine leadership removes the gap. A leader doesn't ask for validation to live his life. He decides, acts, and adjusts if necessary, not recklessly but confidently. His sense of rightness doesn't come from agreement. It comes from alignment with his own standards. This is deeply unsettling to someone who uses approval as a control mechanism. Approval seeking looks polite on the surface. "I just want to make sure you're okay with this. I don't want to upset you. What do you think I should do?" But underneath it communicates uncertainty, and uncertainty invites influence. When a man consistently looks outward for confirmation, a manipulative woman can steer him using praise, disappointment, or withdrawal. Approval becomes currency. Behavior becomes negotiable. Direction shuts that down. A man with direction says, "This is what I'm doing," calmly and without edge. He's open to discussion, but he's not asking to be guided. His movement doesn't depend on her emotional state. And when movement is independent, manipulation loses access. This doesn't mean ignoring her perspective. It means listening without surrendering leadership. Manipulative dynamics rely on conditional approval. "I'll be warm if you do this. I'll pull back if you don't." But when a man doesn't organize his behavior around these reactions, the conditioning fails. He's unaffected by reward and withdraw tactics because his direction isn't driven by emotional reinforcement. This also changes how conflict feels. Approval-seeking men panic during disagreement. They try to restore harmony immediately, even at the cost of self-respect. Manipulative women exploit this by creating emotional tension to regain leverage. A masculine man doesn't rush harmony. He stays in his direction even when there is friction. He doesn't need agreement to continue. That steadiness communicates confidence far louder than reassurance ever could. Direction also reframes attraction. Instead of asking, "How do I keep her?" the question becomes, "Is she aligned with where I'm going?" That reframing instantly removes manipulation from the equation. There's nothing to control when the man is already moving. This is why manipulative women often label masculine men as selfish or uncompromising, not because he refuses connection, but because he refuses control. He doesn't pause his life to manage emotions. He integrates relationships into his path, not the other way around. Healthy women thrive in this dynamic. They don't feel pressure to guide or manage. They relax into responsiveness. They respect a man who knows where he's headed. Direction creates containment, not rigidity. But manipulation can't function without approval leverage. Once a man no longer seeks permission to be himself, approval loses power. Praise doesn't buy compliance. Disapproval doesn't halt momentum. Emotional reactions no longer dictate outcomes. Masculine leadership isn't loud, it's quiet certainty, and certainty removes manipulation at the root, because control only works where movement is unsure. Manipulative dynamics thrive on emotional volatility. Drama is not accidental, it's the fuel source. When emotions swing high and low, when reactions are sharp and unpredictable, control becomes easy. Masculine leadership disrupts this entirely by introducing calm consistency, and that is why manipulative women despise it. Drama requires reaction. Leadership removes reaction. A man who remains emotionally steady regardless of provocation removes the payoff. There is no spike, no chaos, no emotional reward. And without reward, manipulation collapses. Manipulative women often escalate situations subtly. A small comment here, a withdrawn tone there, a delayed response. The goal is not resolution, it's activation. They are watching to see if the man flinches, chases, or over-explains. Any reaction becomes leverage. Calm consistency shuts that down. When a man responds the same way regardless of emotional bait, the pattern breaks. His tone doesn't sharpen, his energy doesn't waver. He doesn't rise or crash. That steadiness communicates control, not over her, but over himself. And self-control is deeply threatening to manipulation. Drama needs contrast. It needs emotional spikes to feel real. Calm makes drama look hollow. Once things stop feeling intense, their emotional power fades. This is why manipulative personalities often accuse calm men of being detached or uncaring. In reality, they're just not reactive. Consistency also removes emotional confusion. Manipulation relies on unpredictability, hot and cold behavior, reward and withdrawal cycles, affection followed by distance. Calm consistency flattens this roller coaster. The emotional environment stabilizes and stability exposes games. When nothing changes based on emotional theatrics, control disappears. Masculine leadership does not argue with chaos. It doesn't attempt to out-dramatize drama. It stays neutral. It stays present. And that neutrality is disarming. There's no contrast to push against. This is why attempts at emotional escalation often become more exaggerated when calm consistency appears. But escalation without reaction only reveals desperation, not power. Calm consistency also protects the man. Men who engage drama lose clarity. They get pulled into narrative battles, emotional justification, and endless conversations. The manipulative woman wins by exhausting him emotionally. A consistent man avoids this entirely. He doesn't debate feelings. He doesn't get pulled into cycles. He responds simply or disengages and moves forward. Consistency doesn't mean tolerance. It means predictable consequences without emotional charge. When boundaries are crossed, the response is the same every time. No anger, no escalation, just distance. This communicates seriousness without hostility and drains drama of oxygen. Healthy women feel safe in this energy. They trust it. They relax. They don't feel the need to test or provoke because there's no chaos to navigate. But manipulation needs chaos. Without emotional turbulence, control strategies become ineffective. There's nothing to hook into, no emotional response to amplify, no instability to exploit. A calm man becomes boring to drama, and boring is deadly to manipulation. This is why manipulative women often label such men as emotionless or flat. But in reality, he simply refuses to turn emotional noise into power. He doesn't avoid feelings. He just doesn't worship them. Masculine leadership is not reactive, it's anchored. And when energy stays anchored, drama fades, not because it's defeated, but because it has nothing to feed on. Calm consistency starves drama of attention. Manipulative dynamics thrive on emotional volatility. Drama is not accidental, it's the fuel source. When emotions swing high and low, When reactions are sharp and unpredictable, control becomes easy. Masculine leadership disrupts this entirely by introducing calm consistency, and that is why manipulative women despise it. Drama requires reaction. Leadership removes reaction. A man who remains emotionally steady regardless of provocation removes the payoff. There is no spike, no chaos, no emotional reward. And without reward, manipulation collapses. Manipulative women often escalate situations subtly. A small comment here, a withdrawn tone there, a delayed response. The goal is not resolution, it's activation. They are watching to see if the man flinches, chases, or over-explains. Any reaction becomes leverage. Calm consistency shuts that down. When a man responds the same way regardless of emotional bait, the pattern breaks. His tone doesn't sharpen. His energy doesn't waver. He doesn't rise or crash. That steadiness communicates control not over her, but over himself. And self-control is deeply threatening to manipulation. Drama needs contrast. It needs emotional spikes to feel real. Calm makes drama look hollow. Once things stop feeling intense, their emotional power fades. This is why manipulative personalities often accuse calm men of being detached or uncaring. In reality, they're just not reactive. Consistency also removes emotional confusion. Manipulation relies on unpredictability, hot and cold behavior, reward and withdrawal cycles, affection followed by distance. Calm consistency flattens this roller coaster. The emotional environment stabilizes and stability exposes games. When nothing changes based on emotional theatrics, control disappears. Masculine leadership does not argue with chaos. It doesn't attempt to out-dramatize drama. It stays neutral. It stays present. And that neutrality is disarming. There's no contrast to push against. This is why attempts at emotional escalation often become more exaggerated when calm consistency appears. But escalation without reaction only reveals desperation, not power. Calm consistency also protects the man. Men who engage drama lose clarity. They get pulled into narrative battles, emotional justification, and endless conversations. The manipulative woman wins by exhausting him emotionally. A consistent man avoids this entirely. He doesn't debate feelings. He doesn't get pulled into cycles. He responds simply or disengages and moves forward. Consistency doesn't mean tolerance. It means predictable consequences without emotional charge. When boundaries are crossed, the response is the same every time. No anger, no escalation. Just distance. This communicates seriousness without hostility and drains drama of oxygen. Healthy women feel safe in this energy. They trust it. They relax. They don't feel the need to test or provoke because there's no chaos to navigate. But manipulation needs chaos. Without emotional turbulence, control strategies become ineffective. There's nothing to hook into, no emotional response to amplify, no instability to exploit. A calm man becomes boring to drama, and boring is deadly to manipulation. This is why manipulative women often label such men as emotionless, flat. But in reality, he simply refuses to turn emotional noise into power. He doesn't avoid feelings. He just doesn't worship them. Masculine leadership is not reactive. It's anchored. And when energy stays anchored, drama fades, not because it's defeated, but because it has nothing to feed on. At the core of all manipulation is a single assumption: the other person is afraid to lose something. Once that assumption disappears, manipulation has nowhere to land. This is why the man who can walk away calmly, cleanly, without bitterness is the one manipulative women despise most. Not because he is cruel or detached, but because he is unreachable through fear. Fear is the lever. Fear of loneliness, fear of starting over, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood. Manipulation weaponizes these fears by dangling loss in front of a man emotionally. When he hesitates, chases, over-explains, or compromises his standards to avoid that loss, control is established. But a masculine man has already made peace with loss. This doesn't mean he wants to lose people. It means he is not terrified of it. His identity, direction, and emotional stability are not sourced from the relationship. Because of that, withdrawal does not paralyze him. Threats do not freeze him. Silence does not provoke panic. The ability to walk away is not dramatic, it's quiet. There are no ultimatums, no speeches, no emotional exits. He simply disengages when alignment disappears. That is devastating to manipulation because control requires continued access. Manipulative tactics only work when the target stays in the room, emotionally invested and uncertain. The moment a man demonstrates that he will leave rather than abandon himself, the power dynamic flips. This is also why manipulative women often test this early. They escalate behavior subtly to see how far they can go. They cross small boundaries. They introduce tension. They threaten distance emotionally. If the man tolerates it, the strategy deepens. If he calmly steps back or walks away, the strategy ends. A man who can walk away communicates something without words. I choose myself first. And that choice cannot be negotiated. Walking away doesn't require anger. In fact, anger often signals attachment. Calm disengagement signals sovereignty. It shows that the man is not trying to win, punish, or prove anything. He simply refuses misalignment. This makes manipulation impossible because there is no hostage. Manipulative dynamics are hostage situations at the emotional level. The man's fear keeps him present. Once fear is removed, manipulation collapses immediately or escalates in desperation. Either way, control is gone. Healthy women respond differently. They respect this trait. They feel safer knowing the connection isn't forced. They know the man is choosing them, not clinging to them. That voluntary choice increases attraction. Manipulative women feel exposed. Without the threat of loss, their tactics are empty. Silence doesn't scare him. Guilt doesn't hold him. Drama doesn't tether him. There is nothing left to control. This is why the willingness to walk away, not theatrical. Empty threats reek of fear. Real detachment feels grounded. A masculine man doesn't talk about leaving. He simply has the capacity to do so, and that capacity is sensed immediately. It lives in his posture, his tone, his boundaries, and his pace. He doesn't hurry to save situations that compromise his self-respect. He doesn't negotiate his standards out of loneliness. He doesn't stay to win arguments that cost his peace. And because of this, he becomes unmovable. This is the final collapse point for manipulation. Not dominance, not control, not confrontation. Freedom. When a man is free internally, no one can steer him emotionally. And a man who cannot be steered cannot be controlled. That is why the ultimate form of masculine leadership isn't authority over others. It's authority over the choice to stay or leave.